Welcome to the second lecture of the chapter on NOCs. So now we will discuss message transmission. So the idea is that in an NOC we send a hierarchy of messages, we send different kinds of messages. So if we send a long message, the message is broken down into packets. So a packet is further broken down into flits, and a flit is a flow bit essentially. And then a flit is broken down into several fits, right? A physical so this is more like a physical digit, right? So you can think of a flit as a flow digit, and this is more like a physical digit. So we'll see what this is. So consider a source, right, and a receiver, and they are connected by a pair of copper wires. So assume that you have 64 parallel copper wires, right, where each wire can send one bit. Then in every cycle, you can basically send 8 bytes of information. So 8 bytes in this case would be what you can send physically in one go. That is a fit. But furthermore, for the purpose of buffering inside the source and the receiver, basically for the purpose of buffering inside the router, we may want to look at larger pieces of data. So something that exists logically, right, as a single atom is essentially a flow digit or a flit. So let's say in this case, the flit could be 16 bytes, for instance, which means that it will comprise two fits. So what happens is that insofar as the logic of transmission is concerned, the entire flit is transmitted in one go. But of course, in this case, it takes two cycles because in the first cycle, we send the first 8 byte portion. And in the second cycle, we send the other 8 byte portion. But clearly, they are sent in consecutive cycles because the entire flit is still one atomic unit. It's sent in one go, even though it may take multiple cycles because it is multiple fits. And then the entire flit is buffered over here, which basically means that there is some storage space in the router here, and the entire flit is stored over here. Now, a packet is basically several flits. So what we say is that we can refer to a packet more or less like a linked list, where the idea is that the first is the head flit, and then we have a sequence of body flits, and finally we have a tail flit, right? So we have the head, a sequence of body flits, and the tail flit. So this is a packet. So clearly, the packet is a sequence of flits, and we don't want all of it to be, buffered in one go, even though we have several schemes that do that. But the key idea of a packet is that all the flits that comprise the packet take the same route from a source to a destination. So let's say if the destination is, sorry, if the route is like this, then pretty much, all the flits in the same packet will take the same route. In the sense, right from head to tail, they will take the same route and basically traverse like that. However, if you consider a message will have multiple packets. And the packets, well, in theory, can take different routes. And then, they can be reassembled at the receiver. The same way it happens in a regular network, right? So this can happen over here as well. So the most important difference between a regular network and an on-chip network is that you are not allowed. So let me maybe write this. It's so important. It has to be written not allowed. So you're not allowed to drop packets. Okay, so this is like a given that it is not allowed to drop packets. So philosophically, this is a marked departure from a regular network because in a regular network, we drop packets. That is how you figure out there is congestion and then you do something. But in the case of an on-chip network, packet dropping is absolutely not allowed. And furthermore, given a large message, well, it is packetized, but oftentimes, many a time, a message is a packet, right? A message, basically the entire message is a single packet. And you basically make all the routing decisions, which basically means you figure out which path your flits will take only for the head flit, and then the rest of the flits follow the head flit, in the sense they take the same route. So that is the broad idea of how we packetize messages, divide a packet into flits. And then again, for a flit, as I have said, all the flits go together, in the sense they are sent in consecutive cycles. So the description is similar to what we described in the last slide. So we have multiple flits in a packet, the head flit, a sequence of body flits, and a tail flit. And of course, given the fact that the flit itself may be more, the number of bits in a flit may be more than the number of parallel wires. So we would require multiple consecutive transmissions, and each such transmission is a fit. So let's now look at a very basic problem, which is that we have the sender over here and we have the receiver over here. And messages are stored. So in this case, let's assume that flits are stored and they go from the sender's side to the receiver's side. So we will see that in this entire on-chip network business, the most important concept, or I would say by far the most important concept, is the question of storage, is a question of buffer space. Because if you go back to slide 30, we had discussed that you're not allowed to drop a message. So given the fact that you're not allowed to drop a message, it does place restrictions upon us, namely that we have to be very, very careful about the buffer space, because there is finite storage capacity within the routers, and ensure that flit is sent from the sender to the receiver only when we are sure that there is enough buffer space available at the receiver. Otherwise, what happens if a message comes, there is no place to store it, we will have to drop it. And dropping the message is, dropping the flit in this case is clearly not an option. So the only way to do that, which basically means that I'm sending some information in terms of in flits, and the flits can be stored at the receiver, basically means you need some information at the sender indicating the number of free buffers, the number of free flit buffers at the receiver. And this information should be there with the sender. So if the sender thinks that there are 5 free flit buffers at the receiver, the sender will send 5 flits. And then, the sender will assume that there are no free flit buffers at the receiver, so it will keep quiet. So as you can see, if I transmit a single flit, that's how it happens. So let's look at credit-based flow control. So the idea is that in this case, the sender, which is node A, maintains an estimate of the number of free buffers at the receiver, which is B. So if B is the receiver and let's say there are 3 free buffers, so then this estimate will be maintained at A, which basically means that A will send 3 flits, and then basically as per its estimate, B will not have any free buffer. So then A will stop sending. This basically means if you look at it another way, that if the sender thinks that the receiver has enough free buffers, then only it sends a flit, right? And otherwise it does not send a flit, because if the receiver does not have free buffers, it will drop the packet. It will drop the flit, and we are not allowed to drop a flit. So dropping a flit is not allowed. Because dropping a flit is not allowed, that is why this method is required. Furthermore, once the receiver, let's say, sends a flit to someone else and it frees a buffer, a flit buffer, that is, all of the buffers are flit buffers because a flit is the basic atomic unit. It will send a message to the sender, which in this case is A, that look, one of my buffers has been freed. So you can send a message, right? So this is known as a credit. So this is it's a single fit message. It does not have to be anything more than that. But again, the key point basically over here is that the moment a buffer becomes free, a credit is sent, right? So that's the most important thing, that a credit has to be sent. That is how A can kind of have an up-to-date or near up-to-date estimate of the number of free flit buffers at B. So let's now discuss the broad terminology over here. TPH, PH stands for fit, is the time it takes a single fit to go across the A to B link. So if we have node A and we have node B, then the time it takes one fit to go from A to B is T fit, and TF is T flit, which is the time it takes a flit to go from A to B. And the moment a fit or a flit comes, so basically the moment a message comes, regardless of the size of the message, it is processed. So we assume it is TPR, and we also assume that all messages take the same time to process. Only after that is a node aware of what was the contents of the message. And then we will define TD as the credit round trip delay. This we will not define now. This specific term will be defined in the subsequent slides. So the assumptions over here, are by the way important, because a lot of the subsequent analysis would depend on these assumptions. So the first assumption is that the routers are clock synchronized. This basically means that they use the same clock and the clocks are synchronized. So if let's say A is counting 10 cycles, then B will also count 10 cycles, right? It's not going to count 20 cycles or even 11 cycles or 9 cycles. So if A, if A is counting 10 cycles, B counts 10 cycles as well. Time is measured in the unit of router cycles, not CPU cycles or anything, and everything is basically an integral multiple of these router cycles. Furthermore, when you receive a message, you don't know what is there in the message. So you process it first, and the time it takes to process is TPR, so this delay is incurred, and then you add it, you insert it into a buffer. All the status messages, whatever they are, the credits, then on message, off message. So we'll discuss these messages in subsequent slides. All the status messages are one fit each, they need not be more than that. So it's easily possible to encode all our status messages within one fit, one physical digit. So let us look at the process of sending credits, and let us also look at the round trip delay. So here of course we define the time axis for nodes A and B, and the time increases as we go in a downward direction. So what happens is that let us assume a buffer at t equal to 0 was freed. So then basically what happens here is that a credit is sent to node A, which is the sender, saying that look, one of my buffers are freed, so you can send a single flit message, and the time it takes to actually send the fit over here, which is that this is a credit basically, is TPH. And as I said, the clocks are synchronized, and then this message gets processed, which is TPR. After that, a flit is sent. So basically this is the flit transmission delay, which is again processed. So you think about it, at t equal to 0, if let's say you decide that you have a free buffer, then by the time you send a credit, it is processed and the flit comes back and that is processed, right? The total time is called TD, which is what we were discussing in the previous slide on terminology. And furthermore, TD can be defined as a sum of these components, these 4 components, that is, which is a sum of TPH, TF, and 2 times TPR, because 1 TPR is incurred over here and 1 is incurred over here. So this is the total, this is called the credit round trip delay. Alright. And this basically means that, in an ideal world, you will expect that if let's say a buffer is freed now, in the very next moment or maybe in the next cycle, a message arrives. But it doesn't happen that way, because a credit has to be sent to the other side and a message has to come, and it takes time. So, what are the properties of credit-based flow control? So, from a buffer getting freed to receiving the next flit, because of that, that act of the buffer getting freed, is that you send a credit and it takes TD units of time. So, let's say within this time period, let's assume that you are continuing to get flits. In the sense, you don't want the receiver over here, which is node B, to remain idle, but you want flits to keep coming, right? So, what is the maximum number of flits that could be coming? So, in this case, you are assuming that basically the time it takes for a single flit to come takes TF cycles. So, of course, the assumption over here is that it's not the case that these TF cycles are spent kind of in the copper wire, but rather a flit comprises multiple fits and those fits are sent in consecutive cycles. So, we can say that look, if it takes one cycle to transmit a single fit, and let's say if there are 4 fits in the flit, then we can assume that TF is equal to 4. This would sort of be a rough calculation. But again, the idea is that to receive the full flit, it will take 4 cycles. So, pretty much, if we do a simplistic calculation based on the assumptions and the reasoning that I just provided, you can receive a maximum of TD by TF flits in this time period, right? So, not more than that. But if the time period is TD, then the maximum number of flits that you can, fully receive would be limited by this, right? So, you can, some of you may want to argue that, look, you can pipeline the link or something. But as I said, let's not look at transmitting flits over a link that way. Instead, the way we should look at is that it takes TF units of time for the flit to be transferred, and for that entire TF units of time, it keeps the link busy, mainly because it's fits, physical digits are being transferred. That is why the maximum number of flits that you can receive is TD by TF. This means that if the size of the buffer at B, right, basically at T equal to 0, is at least TD by TF flits, and assume that, so this is assuming that B is not freeing any more buffers in the TD time frame, then it is clear that A is not going to stall, because A can just keep on sending all the flits within this time period. So, everything that we are discussing is only within this time period of TD, right? It's not beyond it. So, the key idea over here is that in this time period TD, what will happen is that we are essentially operating in the shadow of a credit, where a credit has been sent, and because of that credit a flit is coming. But if you don't want the receiver to stall and you want it to continue to receive flits, then if it has TD by TF free flit buffers, it can receive all of them in this time frame. That's the idea. Then it is not going to stall, right? And furthermore, what can happen is once a flit comes, you can send a credit. So, let's say this flit comes, you send a credit, and then because of that, you basically a message comes, right? So basically what can happen is that, let's say at a steady state, you're also sending flits out from here, you will essentially not stall. And the key idea is mainly because you have TD by TF free buffers which are available. Of course, we need to send a credit message when the buffer becomes free. So, the idea is that if this is A, this is B, as you can see over here, node A and node B, and let's say there is a node C over here, and on a periodic basis you are sending flits from B to C, then basically whenever you send something here, you send a credit backwards. So, in a certain sense, we are doubling the number of messages if you look at that, because every message that is sent, a credit is being sent to the previous node, and that will make our life quite tough and quite difficult, and it's clearly not power efficient, it is clearly not performance efficient. So, before we proceed further, let us look at the TD by TF factor once again. So, assume again we have A and B and their respective timelines. So, what happens is that, let's say at t equal to 0, B transmits a flit.
So which means that a free buffer is created, then the credit is sent, and over time a flit is sent in response to this free buffer and the credit that was sent. So the question is, this time period is TD, and what is it that you expect A to do in this time period, right? So the first thing could be that you expect A not to do anything and wait for the credit, but again A would have to stall, and that is not a good idea. The other idea over here is that A keeps on sending flits because it has sufficient credits and B has sufficient buffers. So the question is that clearly at this point of time, right, and if I kind of like look back and if I assume that a credit is, a flit is received at this point of time, then clearly A should have enough credits such that if it wants to kind of saturate the bandwidth till this point, it can keep on sending flits, right? So basically, because for like one credit is essentially one flit, right, it allows you to send one flit. So what will happen is that if in this time period, if you don't want A to stall, then you want that A at this point of time, when it can send the first flit after t equal to 0 at B, it needs to have enough credits, right, because it is clear that any credit that is sent after t equal to 0 would come either at TD or after TD. So essentially at this point you expect A to have TD by TF flits such that TD by TF credits such that it can send TD by TF flits to saturate the bandwidth at this point of time such that the link is not idle, which further means that the number of free buffers at B should be again TD by TF, you may argue -1, but just keep the matter simple, let's say you would want to have TD by TF free buffers over here, which also means that the total numbers of buffers at B should be more than, or let's say lower bounded by TD by TF, right? So there are different ways to think about it, but the clear point over here that we are trying to make is that in this time period, which basically means which is your response time period, right? When A cannot respond to the credit that you have sent, if you still want enough message transmissions to be there, this means that A needs to have TD by TF credits sometime in the past, and furthermore, so let's say it needs to have TD by TF credits at this point of time, and because we have TD by TF credits over here, we need to have TD by TF buffers at least at this point of time in B such that all of these flits that are being sent can be stored without dropping any flit, right? So also a lower bound on buffers is being placed. So of course an improvement is possible over here, it's called on-off flow control. So the idea is that whenever a message was sent from B, right, a flit was sent, a credit was also sent back. So we are essentially doubling the number of messages. So that's not a good idea. It's much better to work with two thresholds, namely the off threshold and the on threshold. So the idea is that if we have enough free buffers in B, then we immediately send a message to A to stop sending. We say that, look, we have reached a bottom threshold, we just have enough free buffers, so you stop sending. And similarly, if you have anon free buffers, then we can ask A to start sending. So anon is a start sending threshold and enough is a stop sending threshold. So let's look at it. Let us say an off threshold has been reached. We send an enough message. And what could happen is that, so the moment A gets the message, it will turn itself off. But of course, it is possible that many flits that started their journey before this time period, they could be sent, they could be kind of in flight. So we need to have enough buffers to store all of these in-flight flits, right? So all of these have to be stored since you are not allowed to drop. And then what will happen is several messages will be sent from B. So a lot of free flit buffers will be created. So then an on threshold will be reached. So on threshold basically means at this point A can start sending. So then once it gets the message, A will start sending. And so you can clearly see the period of quiescence over here where basically A stops. Then A is asked to send. Why is it asked to send? Because few more free flit buffers are created at B, and then A starts sending.
So let us now analyze the off message. So let's look at the time instant t, because this time instant is the most important for us. So let's look at all the messages that arrive after t. So let's look at the next cycle, which is cycle t plus 1. So basically arrive means that it is fully processed, right? So fully processed means it enters a buffer also. So in this case, we take the time t plus 1, we cut out the processing time, and we cut out the time it took to physically send the flit, which is minus tf minus tpr. And then what we do is that if we assume that an off message was sent at time t, then it will reach from B to A at time t plus tph, and it will take tpr units to get processed. So essentially, there is a risky period, right? Basically, the risky period is, let's say, between this point and this point, when the sender, which is A in this case, does not know that B actually does not need a message, but it will just keep sending. So we need to look at all the messages sent in this window, and we need to ensure that B has enough buffer space to store all of those flits, because as I said, we are not allowed to discard a flit, right? So flit discarding is not something that is allowed. Hence, we need to have adequate buffer space. So the question is, how long is this risky period during which packets are sent to B, right? And basically, all that we need to do is that we need to subtract. So we subtract the cycles. We take this, we subtract this, and we add one, because we are considering. So 5 minus 3 is actually 5 minus 3 is actually 3, because there are three cycles, 3, 4, and 5. So that's why we add 1. So, well, lo and behold, what we see is that after we rearrange the terms and do a little bit of cancellation, this term is exactly equal to TD. TD, as you can see, if I just quickly go back, is the expression that we have been seeing for quite some time now, right? It's a total credit round trip delay, and we have been seeing this for quite some time now, in the sense we had seen it here also in the credit based flow control. So we just see the same thing, TD appear again and again. So in this case, it appears. So again, in a certain sense, it can be thought of as a round trip delay here. So pretty much TD is the length of the risky period, which means that B can receive TD by TF flits. So in a sense, after sending the off message, these are the number of flits it can have, which basically means that it needs to have enough buffer space available. In this case, what is enough? So it is basically TD by TF it needs to have available, right? And or let's say there's a minimum number of buffers it needs to have available, right? If it has less than that and an off message has not been sent, then there is a potential problem, because a flit could be sent in this risky period, and basically what could happen is that the flit could be you know discarded.
So now, because we cannot drop flits, a straightforward extension of this argument would be that n of is greater than equal to TD by TF, right? So this is a standard result that we have been seeing. So now what is the necessary condition between n on and n off? Well, so n off basically says that, look, if I have enough free buffers, then it means that I'm just at my minimum. So what I need to do is that I basically need to send an off message, right? So this is what it says. But what anon says that, look, fine, you ask the sender to switch off, and also you ensure that you have enough free buffers. such that, just in case the sender had sent messages which were still in flight, they would be accommodated in these free buffers. But now the question is, when do I start sending messages once again? So that is when the receiver has n on free buffers, and common sense would suggest that n on is greater than n off. So of course, if I can take the pathological case where n on is equal to just n off plus 1, which means that I receive one message and then I send an off message because one free buffer goes, and again that is sent, then I send an on message. So this is no different from credit based flow control, right? So this is essentially a credit based kind of idea, which is not something that I like, even though it's not exactly credit based, but it's something broadly along that direction. So to avoid frequent on and off messages, there needs to be a sizable gap between the thresholds, such that without sending frequent start-stop messages, in one go we can transmit a fair number of messages. So the idea now is that, let's say a message was sent, and then the number of free buffers fell to the off threshold. An off message was sent, then for a long period, A would stop sending messages. After that, B at some point of time, which is at this point of time, would realize that no, I have enough free buffers, because a few more messages were sent from B to its neighbor, which is C. So then what would happen is that A would get the on message and again start sending. So this means that n, which is the total number of buffers, right? So this is the total number of buffers at B. So we are only talking about B. So that should be evident, if not implicitly, if not explicitly, at least implicitly. But this means that n, which is the number of buffers, should be far greater than n on, right? So it should be, reasonably large. Why should it be reasonably large? Well, the reason it should be reasonably large is because you should have, enough messages over here, even though A is not sending, such that during this time period, you will not remain idle. So what you will do is that you will keep on sending, right? And basically after you have sent, messages, you have enough free messages. So basically from the off threshold, so let's say this is the off threshold, the moment you reach the on threshold, you send a message to A to start sending. So let's say that at this point of time, I have n on free buffers. Okay. So if I have n on free buffers, which is why I sent, the on message in the first place, right? Then the number of non-free buffers, or the number of filled buffers, right, is going to be n minus n on. All right. So if it is going to be n minus n on, right, then we want this to be more than a threshold. I'll tell you why. Because the idea is that in this period, right, which is the shadow of the on message, which is basically when I'm sending an on message and I have not received a response yet, which is I have not received a flit because of it yet, during this period I would like to keep sending, right? So the idea is that, the length of this period is again TD, because we have been seeing this over and over again. And basically how many flits can I send? I can send TD by TF. So we need, at least these many flits over here, the buffer should have these many flits, such that I am not idle during this time period. That is the key idea. So if I were to kind of clean up the screen, the shadow of an on message, which is this period, which is TD cycles, I would not like to be idle, which basically means that, the number of non-free buffers, or let's say the number of filled buffers, which is equal to n minus n on, it should be more than TD by TF. All right. So because if n minus n on is 0, then what will happen is that we will not be able to send any message in this period, right, any flit in this period, which is not acceptable to us. So we want this number n minus n on, which is nothing but, right, the number of let's say filled buffers, right? Let me put a number sign, number of filled buffers at the time that the on message was sent. We want that to be greater than or equal to TD by TF such that there is no idleness in the shadow of an on message, right? Such that you can keep on transmitting flits, and in the shadow of an on message there is no idleness at all. This is something that we would like to ensure. This is something that we would like to have. All right. So the point is that we will have enough flits. So what do we have? So what we have is n minus n on is greater than or equal to TD by TF, which means n is greater than or equal to n on plus TD by TF. Now we know that n on is greater than n off, right? So this we know from the previous slide, that n on is greater than n off. So this value is greater than n off plus TD by TF. What we have proven earlier or shown earlier is that n off is also needs to be greater than or equal to TD by TF to ensure that all the messages in flight can be buffered, right? And so basically if I then use the fact that n off is greater than or equal to TD by TF, then this expression over here is greater than or equal to 2 TD by TF. So basically we also have a constraint on the total number of buffers, which is that n is greater than 2 TD by TF. All right. So we have several constraints, right? So we have the first constraint, n off is greater than or equal to TD by TF, n on is greater than n off, n minus n on is greater than or equal to TD by TF, and n itself the number of buffers, right? So n is the total number of buffers at which node? At B, that is greater than 2 TD by TF. So we basically have a bunch of constraints which are essentially limiting the choice of values of 3 variables. What are these 3 variables? They are n, the total number of buffers, n off, which is the off threshold, and n on, which is the on threshold, right? So now we are at an interesting point, at an interesting juncture, where basically we have looked at 2 flow control mechanisms between, of course, a single source and a single receiver, right? So this is what we have done. We have looked at single source, single receiver kind of, single sender, single receiver kind of situation, where we have looked at credit based flow control, which to a certain extent is inefficient because credits are sent, but of course credits could be batched. So this batching is happening via this on off mechanism primarily. So the on off mechanism is primarily doing this, where we are reducing the number of messages that were originally associated with the credit based schemes. So now what we will do is that we will slightly up our game, and we will instead start looking at larger systems, right? So it is not just a single edge, in a sense, a single sender, single receiver based system, but we will start looking at somewhat larger systems, right? So in this case, let us consider again a mesh network with a source and a destination. So we will look at the simplest idea, which is circuit switching, which was there in the old telephone network, old telephone networks. So here what would happen is that from a source to a destination, we would reserve buffer space in the routers along the way. So what we would do is we would first send a small flit, which would basically take some path, and then it would reserve all the buffer space for the entire path, right? Such that once the message is sent, there is nobody to stop it. We have enough buffers available, and the entire message is sent from the source to the destination in one go. So after we send the message, we clear the buffers. But of course, let's say that each router has 3 buffers each, and the message itself is, let's say 9 flits. So then of course, it will kind of pipeline and move like a worm. But the fact is that buffers are reserved along all the nodes on the path. And once the message is sent, we clear the buffers. So if I were to look at this diagram over here, and so basically let's say this is the source, this is the destination, and there are 3 hops. So this is hop 1, hop 2, hop 3. So what I do over here is that basically I first send a probe flit whose job is to go from the source node to the destination node. And let us assume that there are k hops between the source and destination, and it takes 1 cycle each per hop. That is a simplistic assumption to live with. So in this case, the probe packet, the probe flit in this case, the fastest that it can go is essentially k cycles. So the probe will reach from the source to the destination, 3 hops, 1, 2, 3 reaches the destination. The destination then would basically immediately start reserving, recording the fact that a circuit has been established. That's what it's called, right? So this is called a circuit. So a circuit has been established, so the reservations would happen, and an acknowledgement would be sent, right? So basically reservations would happen and an acknowledgement would be sent that, look, now I have reserved buffer space for you. The fastest that the response could come down is again, again it would take k cycles. So mind you, there are 2 possible variations of this idea. In one case, reservations could happen while sending the probe flit. In another case, reservations could happen while sending the response. So it doesn't matter. The first one would tie up resources for more time, the second one for less time. So, but of course, the first one is simpler. So there is a kind of performance and simplicity trade-off over here. And after that, after the probe has been sent and the response has been received, so this is 2k cycles basically over here, then the message is sent flit by flit. So basically, let us assume that the length of the message in flits is L, and B is the number of flits that can be sent per cycle, the channel bandwidth. So the total time that will actually take to send the message is essentially L by B for a single hop. But given the fact that we are pipelining it, what will happen is that if there are 2 flits, one flit will be here, the other one will be here, then this flit will come here, the other flit will come here. So if I look at a kind of a timeline where the x-axis is cycles and the y-axis is basically at which hop it is, the hop count basically. So now let us take a look at this expression and let's see where it is derived. We will make the assumption that the channel bandwidth, the flits per cycle, is greater than or equal to 1. It's very easy to extend this formula to a case where the flits per cycle is less than 1, which nowadays is becoming more common. But let me discuss the genesis of this simplistic formula. So the key idea is that if L is the length of the message in flits and B is the number of flits per cycle, the total number of cycles it will take to basically send all the flits of the message along the first hop is basically going to be L by B, which is what you see over here. So all of these cycles, this part is L by B. After that, if I look at this part, right, if I go to the top, if I go and look at this part, then this part pretty much, we have 1 cycle per hop, right. So basically, we have 3 hops here, 1, 2, 3. So we have k cycles over here. Kindly note that 1 cycle is being double counted, which is this cycle over here. So the cumulative number of total cycles is now k plus L by B minus 1, because of the double counting. So in the case where a flit is an atomic unit and it is taking multiple cycles, so of course in this case the idea is that we may not want to kind of pipeline fits within a flit. So in that case, if let's say B is 0.5, then instead of 1, this will become 2 over here because there will be a double counting of 2 cycles. But let's not get into, let's not make this formula more complicated. Let's stick with this simplistic view that it is k plus L by B minus 1, right? And, consider this to be the case where, it will hold for cases where you pretty much we can send new flits every cycle. So, for that minus 1 will hold. So, the total time is 3k plus L by B minus 1, which again is a simplistic expression just for the sake and purpose of analysis. But what we can clearly see is that this protocol in many ways is reasonably wasteful. Why is it wasteful? Because once a circuit is established, we can do a lot of great things, but just to establish the circuit, which is the probe phase, the response phase, and then the message transmission phase, it takes quite a bit of time, and this thing takes 2k cycles, and furthermore it kind of locks resources or blocks resources in this case being router buffers for a large period of time, which again is not the best thing, right, from our point of view. So the idea is that this is good for bulk transfers where we want to transfer a large number of bytes in one go. So then of course, needless to say, this is a good idea, but there are large overheads for a single shot transfer. As a result, this may not be the best idea for an on-chip network that has many small transfers instead of one large transfer. So what we can instead do is we can look at packet-based flow control, which is the store and forward approach. Instead of doing flow control as we were doing in the earlier case, the earlier case incidentally was called circuit switching, where we are essentially reserving space for the entire circuit, which is the route from the source to the destination. Pretty much we were doing things at the message level. So in this case, if let's say we want to send a packet to a router, which is a set of flits, then the idea is we send all the packets over here. We have enough buffer space here to store the entire packet, which means all of its constituent flits. And the entire packet is sent, entire packet is buffered here, then the entire packet is sent, it is buffered here. So I have a small animation that can make things clearer. So as you can see, all the flits of one packet are being sent. Then all the flits of the next packet are being sent, so on and so forth. So again, I can draw the same diagram where I have cycles in the x-axis, hops in the y-axis. So as you can see, the length of this is L by B and we have k hops. So in this case, actually it is a much slower protocol if you think about it, even though we are doing it at a packet level. The total number of cycles that it is taking us is k times L by B, which is high, which is significantly high as compared to even the previous case. So it is true we are not locking up, kind of blocking resources for a long time, but nonetheless it is on the higher side, right? It's on the far higher side. In fact, the basic store and forward idea, that's the reason people don't use it, but they use something else, an improvement of this. But again, as I said, if we look at this, the idea is that because we store the entire packet, then forward it, then store and then forward it, and furthermore, we need space for all the flits of the packet. So if a packet has 4 flits, but we have space for only 3, then the packet, no flit of the packet is sent. This is one more caveat. That's the reason this is not a great idea. So then we have virtual cut-through routing or VCT. So even though we send flits before the entire packet is buffered, we need to ensure that there is space for the entire packet, right? So VCT, the idea is the same, but there is one advantage over here over store and forward. So let me first tell you what is common. What is common is this part, something that I just said, and what is different is basically this diagram, which again we will look at. So given the fact that store and forward and VCT are of the variety where they work with packets themselves, right, where they work with full packets. The idea here is that we still need space for the entire packet, right? So in this case, a packet, as you can see, has 4 flits. If you have space in this router for only 3 flits, then the packet cannot be sent. No flit of the packet can be sent, right? So basically that is a necessary requirement. But the advantage is that we can do pipelining of sorts, in the sense that we don't have to store the entire packet before forwarding a flit. So what we do is that we can basically keep forwarding the flits even though all of them have not, all the flits of the same packet have not arrived at the router. As you can see over here, this is the animation here. If I were to just compare this with the previous animation, you can quickly see the difference. So the previous animation was this: the entire packet comes, it's stored, then the entire packet goes. The current animation is different, where we do reserve space at the packet level, but again we don't wait for the entire packet to arrive at a router before sending any flit towards the destination. So in this case, as you can see, the animation does indeed look quite different, and its analysis of virtual cut through routing, this scheme, is also different. So in this case, what we do is that we send these message flits, but as I said in the previous case, we were actually waiting for the entire packet to arrive. So this was the wait phase, and then only we were sending. In this case, this wait has gone. So we don't wait. So the moment we have a flit, we try to send it to the next node, and then the next flit arrives, we try to send it to the next node, so on and so forth. So in this case, the final timing expression is k plus L by B minus 1. And we have already seen this expression. So we have seen this expression when we were doing circuit switching. And the reason, if you would see both the graphs, both the plots are the same. And in this hops and cycles, both of them are the same. And the reasons for this are also, reasons for this expression are also the same. So what are the problems in the VCT scheme? Well, what is good we already know, which is that pipelining of flits in a packet across routers is possible, as we just saw. But again, what are the problems? So let us consider 4 routers A, B, C and D. The black ones are flits from packet 1 which are destined to C. So they are supposed to go here. The orange ones are destined to go from B to D. They are destined to go down. And the blue ones from packet 3 are destined to some other node beyond D, so that we don't care. So the idea is that we cannot send any flit from packet 1, which are these guys, till the router at B is totally empty, right? So this is a problem, because the router at B has 2 flits, even though it has 2 empty flit buffers. None of the black flits can come here. And the reason is that we need space to buffer the entire packet, and this space is not there, hence we will not do any transmission. And as you can see, this is clearly inefficient, right? This is clearly wasteful of resources. In this case, the resources are flit buffers. So in this case, needless to say, we have an opportunity to send this flit over here. We have an opportunity to send this flit over here, but we are not doing that. So if I compare circuit level circuit switching with packet level switching, so we will see that there are interesting cases that come about in terms of the timing. So circuit switching was slow and we were very upset with it. So we said it is 3k plus L by B minus 1. But store and forward's timing was also bad, the reason being the store and the forward. So this was k times L by B. So what is the best? The best idea that is coming out from here is k plus L by B minus 1, which is the time in cycles. Of course, the assumption that we are making is that you can transmit a new flit every cycle, right? So that assumption is being made, and but if you break that, these constants 1 will change, right? These guys will change, but that will not make a big difference overall. So that's the reason we decided to live on with this simplistic assumption. But the key point is that in any virtual cut through kind of scheme, as we can see over here, what is happening is that we are losing these opportunities, as you can see, where we could transmit flits, but we are not transmitting, right? So this is a problem and we will have to solve it. So one solution is to buffer at the flit level. So instead of waiting to have enough space for the entire packet, what we could do is we could do wormhole flow control, which is the way that a worm moves. So we do not have to wait for space to be created to buffer the entire packet. The flow control should be at the level of flits. So this does not solve all our problems, right? But as we see, it will solve some, but let's look at the assumption over here. So the assumption here is, the setup here is the same as what we had seen in VCT, where basically the black flits are destined to router C and the orange flits are destined to D, and these ones are destined somewhere else. So in this case, what we can do is that we can send the black flits over here, right? And then of course we can send them forward. So as you can see that this is an efficient transfer. But this also has problems which I would like to show in the next slide, which is over here, that there is a problem with wormhole routing, that a flit from packet 1, if its route is ABC. So in this case, as you can see, the diagram is slightly different. The flit buffers here are full, so there is no additional space, and these orange flits want to come here and these flits want to go somewhere else, and these guys are stuck. So now the point is that we send the black flits to B, but because they are not at the head of the flit buffer queue, and at the head of the flit buffer queue we have the orange flits which cannot make progress because they need to go down, whereas the black flits need to go here, and the black flits could make progress, right? What is essentially happening is that the black flits are stuck, they cannot move. They cannot go any further. The black flits are stuck, even though they could move. In an ideal world, they should be allowed to move. But because we have a single queue of flits and the head of the queue is blocked, or the flits at the head of the queue are blocking the entire queue, the black flits are unfortunately stuck. So this is a classic case of head of the line blocking. The black flits could go to C, however the orange flits are blocking them. So this is where we come to our last scheme, which is the most sophisticated in this space. So it is basically the same as creating multiple lanes of traffic within a road. So these are called virtual channels. So here what we do is that even though between A and B, where A in this case is the sender and B is the receiver, there is a single physical channel, but we kind of logically think that there are multiple virtual channels, where each virtual channel is associated with its own flit buffer at the destination. In this case, the destination is B, and even though all the virtual channels are kind of sharing the same physical channel, which is sharing the same copper wires, but logically it is as if there are 4 separate channels and 4 separate flows on the channels, and each channel is associated with its own set of flit buffers. This is nothing different from, consider a busy intersection of roads, right? So basically, each road, if it has multiple lanes, then pretty much all the vehicles on a lane, on the vehicles on a road are still kind of on that road, but they belong to separate lanes. So you could have, a right turn lane which is just allowed to turn right, assuming right side driving, assuming left side driving. You could have a left turn lane which could just turn left, right, and the rest of the traffic could go straight. So that is possible. So the same way that you divide a road into lanes, and depending upon which part of the world you live in, if you have left side driving like in India, then you would have a dedicated left turn lane, and then the left turn lane traffic would not be blocking the traffic on the other lanes. Or let's say if you have right side driving, you could have a dedicated right turn lane, And also you could have a dedicated left turn lane where you also don't block the traffic that is going straight, right? So the same way that we create lanes on regular roads, we can say that look, the actual channel, like the actual road, is the same, but again we have 4 virtual channels where every flit is kind of marked with which virtual channel it belongs to, and then automatically it is directed to the correct set of buffers at the destination, which is at the receiver, which is B. So if I were to have virtual channels, which is akin to having multiple queues on each router, and we consider the same example, so we consider this example over here, which was kind of troubling us. If we consider the same example with 2 queues, so we will find that the orange flits are still blocked because they can't move, right? So in this case, they are supposed to go here and they are stuck. But the black flits will have a different virtual channel and they can just move, right? So they can simply move and they can go from A to C, which means that by splitting a physical channel into virtual channels, we are avoiding head of the line blocking. This is why I have written no HOL. HOL means head of the line blocking. Mainly because this is like a separate lane, and even though this lane is stuck, I am on a different lane and that lane traffic is free to go. Hence, I just use my lane. So the lane, so in many roads we have underpasses, we have flyovers, overbridges and so on. So let's say one lane you need to go straight and you hit a traffic light, but in the other lane you kind of go on a flyover. So in that case the traffic is not impeded. This is a classic case that kind of embodies this thought, this principle, which is that the black lane was not being blocked. So all the black flits, as you can see, this way just moved and moved and moved. So what are the pros and cons of virtual channels? Along with solving the blocking issue, this increases throughput significantly, mainly because we can multiplex a single physical channel among different virtual channels. As a result, what happens is that if one of the lanes or virtual channels known as a VC is blocked, then packets on the other VC can make progress, of course, if they are going in other directions or if their target VC is free, right? So in this case, they could very well be going in the same direction, but they could very well be taking a different VC on the destination router, which is free. This does increase the complexity of the router substantially, so we'll look at it. And assigning virtual channels in routers and tracking them and ensuring that they are optimally assigned is hard, but we will again see that it's not that hard in practice. So now we have discussed the ins and outs of message transmission. So in the next lecture, we will focus on routing algorithms, which will be the third lecture in this series on NOCs.